This episode of Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you by StarCityGames.com and the StarCityGames.com weekly sale, where this week you can save 10% on legendary creatures. Building a new commander deck? At least one of those cards is 10% off at StarCityGames.com/sale. Buying 10 Ragavans in the hope of trading them for a living, breathing monkey? One of those is basically free if you order from September 13th at 11 a.m. to September 20th at 10:59 a.m. For those of you with a more measured wish list, don't worry, because every Monday a new SCG weekly sale starts. This week that's 10% off legendary creatures, and next week you can find a new great discount at StarCityGames.com/sale.
What's up, everyone? Justin Parnell here,
along with Ryan Overturf, and we want to tell you about the single best podcast on the SCG network.
Well, obviously, Ryan, you're talking about the 540.
Indeed I am, and that is the best podcast because we talk about the best format in the history of Magic.
Cube Draft?
Cube Draft.
Every week we go over all things Cube.
We're talking about in-depth reviews of brand new cards.
The best ways to draft and think about Arena and Magic Online Cube formats,
as well as ways to play with your friends
and ways to play with your enemies.
Also some ways to make your friends into your enemies.
And cardboard takes of a variety of temperatures.
So if you're a fan of structured nonsense,
or if you hate it,
either way, all the same, check out the 540 every week wherever you find your podcasts and right here on StarCityGames.com.
This week's Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel, the #1 store for Magic the Gathering inspired apparel. Take a look at their t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, and just general stylings at coalesceapparel.shop. Then use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10% on your entire order. And seriously, I want to emphasize that sticker part. Shirts are cool, but you can send a targeted message with a sticker. Slap it on your deck box if it matches your commander, or if you really want to get inventive, find a way to slap the 3x4 sticker on your 2.5x3.5 Magic card, maybe with a sleeve, maybe with a hard case. You're inventive people. You'll find a way to make it work. So take a look at coalesceapparel.shop, check out their product lines like Wooburg Forever and Ravnica University, and see what catches your eye. Remember, use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10%. Coalesce Apparel and Design. No one made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 23 of Dominaria's Judgment, a weekly modern podcast brought to you by StarCityGames.com. I'm Dom Harvey. I'm here with Ari Lax, and last week we brought you a very special episode, and this week it's just an episode. I'm sorry, but we'll try and make it worth your time.
Yeah, we can't go back in time and start inserting new Modern Pro Tours every week into 2011, so we're making do with what we can.
We could just do a recap of the weekly Magic Online results from 10 years ago. So some like very antiquated Splinter Twin deck list, or I think we would still be in like that 2-week window before, once we know what bans are necessary as a result of that Pro Tour, but before they've actually happened yet. And so people are just going hog wild in the queues, trying to get that out of their system while they still can. But in case you don't understand what we're referring to last week we brought you a 10-year anniversary episode for the first Modern Pro Tour and the creation of Modern and its debut at Pro Tour Philadelphia. We did a 2-part podcast with interviews with members of the top 8 there, high-profile competitors in the tournament, competitors who would have been high-profile if just one or two more things had broken their way, as well as people who were behind the curtain on the inside, people like Zach Hill, Gavin Verhey, Tom Lapilli, on just what went into Modern being created and then just getting that debut on the big stage there. And that accompanies the written part of that oral history that went up last week over on the select side at StarCityGames.com, which also contains the full transcripts of those interviews in case you don't want to sit there through 4.5 hours of content there. Although having been through that and edited it all and pieced it together, I would say it's worth it. But I admit that I have a unique perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, at the least, you can listen to some of them and skip some of the others. I don't know. Maybe you just want to hear all about Nate Holt, and he is, in fact, on that, talking about his journey into wizardry.
Yeah, he is the one person that I somehow managed to miss out of that seemingly comprehensive list of guests there. But yeah, that was a ton of fun to do. I have not been in the content creation game for as long as you have. I'm a young buck in these waters, but definitely I think the favorite thing that I've worked on in this capacity. And not the kind of thing you can do every week, like we said, but when you get the chance, I think you have to seize it, and very happy with how all of that turned out.
No, absolutely agree with all that. It was a great thing to work on, and I'm glad it turned out the way it did. So if you haven't checked it out, please do. It's awesome. And if you want to listen to us talk about Modern, well, we're going to talk about Modern.
Yeah, so less about us and ancient history, and more about the unspeakable terrors that lurk in the night. And I don't mean Innistrad, although more on that in a second. I mean, a former French professional did not win the Modern Challenge this weekend. What's going on?
I think that there was a good run of it. I believe the Sunday results have a fairly high finish for Mr. Coffeyette, which is like a WAFO by association. But, you can only do so much. It does look like, according to Twitter, Nassif may have slept through some more important things this week, like day 2 of the Arena Open. But that may explain his absence from these Modern results.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, literally everybody on my Twitter feed won $2,000 in the Arena Open this weekend, at least the people who turned up for the tournament. So potentially a very costly mistake there for Gabriel Nassif. But yeah, I think it's mostly a return to form for the Modern Challenges this weekend. Of course, given that we took a break from this last week, we had a pair of Modern Challenges there that we didn't cover. And then also the previous week, we were recording, as we often do nowadays, on Sunday night, waiting for the results of that one to come in. And so we technically have 4.75 Modern Challenges that we haven't really got through yet.
Yeah. Do you want to start with a quick recap of last week, or you just want to go with this week and kind of throw that in at the end?
So starting at the top, I suppose, we had this discussion as we were recording about the place of Isn't Murktide in the format. It seemed like that deck had been receding a little bit, struggled to hold on to its place at the top of the food chain. And then, of course, on the Sunday, Nassif wins a challenge with Isn't Murktide and 2 more copies in the top 8. And looking over the other more recent challenges this weekend and last weekend, just very good performances across the board. Top 8 representation varies, as of course it always will. But you look at the top 16, top 32, either the most popular deck or one of the most popular decks across the board there. So I don't think that deck is going anywhere.
No, it's pretty good. I had some time to put some more reps in with it. I think that I don't know. I have this issue with Delver decks a lot, just like creatures lining up against removal. And I think this one has a little less wiggle to it than the traditional Legacy style, just because the weaker cantrips, it just makes it harder to always reliably keep throwing a threat at your opponent. And, you lose some games because your opponent plays like 3 Path to Exiles and you're like, what are you doing with those in 2021? But, that happens.
It doesn't have the Legacy Delver pedigree where some random new 2-drop has to be banned every year or so because the basic core is so fundamentally broken and apparently untouchable that you just have to keep banning around the edges instead. But I think this deck is both very solid, but I think it's solid in a mostly unexploitable way. Like with most of the other top decks in the format, whether it's Hammer or the various Cascade decks or Elementals during its brief heyday and so on and so forth. If you told me you're going into a tournament where this is the most popular deck, I could come up with some possible responses to beat that, whether it's in deck selection, card selection, what have you. With Murktide, I think that is more difficult than it might be for any other deck, really. I know the rise of Hammer Time was attributed in part to that deck being good against Murktide, but I don't know how true that even is anymore necessarily now that they have had time to adapt. So I think it's always there, and you can't really do anything about it. So I guess make your peace with it while you can.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I think there's one other deck I put in that category, and it's kind of funny because I think you listed it as one of the things that's exploitable. I think that's Temur Crashgate. And we do see another top 8 by Devin O'Donnell, Doomwake, this weekend with, I don't know if he was playing Seasoned Pyromancer a week ago, but the rest of it looks really familiar. I'm a pretty big fan of like the one Murktide Regent that's showing up there, just like a big thing that wins the games that your opponent tries to attack your Cascade plan with. It's pretty good when your opponent's trying to Chalice of the Void you to play like a 8/8 for 2. But yeah, I think that is the other deck that has that kind of resiliency, just because so many of its cards are just like raw functional. It's, you know, capable of playing through hate. Yeah, I think it's just a good deck. So I think Izzet and Temur are like the two decks that are, you know, they're the Juns of this era, to put it simply. You know, they're not gonna, you know, if they're ahead versus everything, something went wrong, but they're not going to be terrible ever.
Yeah, that does seem to be a new weekly event as well, is Doomwake top-8ing a challenge with Rhinos with one new card and then raving about how good that card is. So initially that was Prismari Command and then Fury, both of which are not stock necessarily, but you see them increasingly often these days. And maybe Seasoned Pyromancer is the next card on this list. I was fooling around a bit this week with the Glimpse Cascade deck, which is a true delight, if not as maybe stable, is if that's the right word, as the other Cascade decks. And it has a unique role there where it's a just source of stuff which you can then warp board into something else. But I was very impressed just with that card in various Cascade shells that could cast it, where it's just the perfect kind of bridge card for a fair game that also gets you towards your 8 copies of Violent Outburst, Charlotte Station, what have you.
Yep, just a perfectly serviceable good card. I think that especially as people keep playing the Azorius control decks we talked about, having access to those is important. I know that in playing this deck, I kind of learned, I know Max Magic, the other player who keeps top-8ing everything with this deck, put out a sideboard guide via Twitter, and it involved boarding in all the endurances against Azorius control. And I was kind of like, that's weird. And then I followed it, and I realized that deck just like can't beat a 3/4 with Flash. It's really stupid because all the removal's prismatic ending, and trading 3 mana on their turn after the thing's already attacked once is like, it's not a good exchange. So like anything that is like better than an endurance would be great. And Seasoned Pyromancer falls right into that window there in that matchup.
Yeah, you end up with this pattern in larger formats a lot of the time. So it does happen in Modern, but maybe especially in Legacy and even Vintage, where because there are specific powerful threats you have to be able to answer, all of the popular interaction in the format uses that as a litmus test. And so anything which maybe is weaker in the abstract, but which is able to get around that, suddenly is actually very hard to remove for those decks. And that's why, you know, you saw in the past where like there are certain Legacy decks that would be favored against some Vintage decks, or Modern decks against Legacy decks, or whatever, you know, format N and then format N+1, you can kind of extrapolate to where if there are specific requirements that you have to meet, usually there aren't good universal tools that do that, and there are going to be some blind spots there. And in this case, just 3/4 Flash for 3 turns out to be one of them.
Yeah. I mean, you see this a lot even with the good cards with Murktide Regent, just kind of like that and Ragavan being the fork of the format where you have to beat one with removal, and there's not really a spell that conveniently kills both of them.
Yeah, everything that does costs at least 2 mana for the most part, or I guess Exactly Solitude is the one exception, but then that's 2 costs most of the time. So either way, it's basically impossible to trade with Ragavan and Murktide Regent with the same card on parity, whether it's mana, cards, or whatever. And that's the fork that this specific deck puts you in with Izzet Murktide, where we see like actual Doomblade popping up from time to time and Terminates in the John Saga decks and stuff like that. But, you know, 2 mana versus 1, that's as efficient as it's going to get for the most part. And even that is, you know, 2 mana is literally 200% as much as 1 mana, and it feels like so much more than that a lot of the time.
Yeah, on the draw versus Ragavan, 2 mana may as well be infinity. We should touch on the Jund deck because I don't see a lot of it in these results. And after playing with it a bit more, I think I'm starting to understand. You know, we did our whole episode about it, and like it does a lot of good things. I think that once people start moving away from like Renin 6 being exactly what it was in terms of crushing people, the deck loses a lot of equity because there's a lot of lands. It's not leveraging Renin 6 as good as it should be. Just like in the way that like if you look at the 4-color Renin 6 decks, like Ren is fixing all the mana and you have cards that cost more than 2 and this deck doesn't. And then like it actually has this weird bind, and I kept losing matches to this with Sanctifier and Vec, just like a weirdly big problem, even despite Tarmogoyf. And the reason is that the matchup that is going to bring in Sanctifier against you, where it's going to be the biggest issue, is Hammer Time, Pure Steel Paladin. And you end up in this spot where Tarmogoyf is horrendous against the rest of the Pure Steel Paladin deck. This is kind of the classic lineup where the Jund player against Infect is supposed to sideboard out Tarmogoyf and just have all interaction because it keeps your opponent from doing anything. Whereas if you draw 2 Tarmogoyfs, your hand is going to die on turn 3. And you end up in this spot where, like, you have to have Tarmogoyf in your deck after sideboarding when it's bad against everything else your opponent's doing.
Yeah, I know a few months back in one of our first episodes, actually, we touched on Jund Shadow versus Rakdos Shadow in a world dominated by Heliod, where Tarmogoyf being able to not just attack, but attack well into Oriole Champion, that was almost enough reason to splash green by itself at the time. And the most popular, pro back, pro red, I guess it's not Paladin on Vec anymore, it's Sanctifier on Vec, but that effect is showing up in a deck where, all right, you can somewhat invalidate the 2/2 body with your Tarmogoyf and with your construct tokens, but the end game here is they're going to put Colossus Hammer on that. Your interaction can't target it anymore, and so that Sanctifier now just outsizes everything else that you can do at the same time. And so it's not the trump there that maybe it is in some other contexts. It's more of a delaying tactic, but as you mentioned, the rest of the deck isn't really positioned well to capitalize on that small amount of time that you're gaining that way.
Yeah, and also Sanctifier just like shutting down Channeler is just, and Luris, it's really tough. That card is a problem. Just a big problem for anyone who keeps putting black and red cards in the same deck.
Which is a lot of people at the moment. I think the combined metagame share of Is It Murktide, the Rakdos, Mardu, Jund, Ragavan decks, and then the various Grixis piles, if you want to label them with that. Those families of decks combined make up a pretty large portion of the metagame, and would not surprise me if over the long sweep of the past few weeks, if collectively they are the most popular archetype, even by a decent margin.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's varying degrees of weakness to Sanctifier. Like if you have Murktide Regent, I don't think it's quite as big of a deal. But yeah, it's a tough card for a lot of these decks to beat. Maybe we can bridge into talking about the this domain zoo deck that's been popping up, because I want to talk about Wild Nacatl in 2021.
Okay.
So this deck it's the same player, put up a top 8, two top 8s and a top 16 over the last 4 challenges. Is that correct?
I don't have the
two top 16s and a top 8.
Yeah, I know it's at least one top 8, at least one top 16, and maybe there's another result in there too.
Yeah, so it was 10th this Saturday, 6th last Sunday, and like 10th the day before that, I believe. I'd have to pull it all up exactly, but they've had a good run with this deck. And I kind of want to make the point that, they are playing with Ragavan as well, but Ragavan I've had a lot of Memnite issues with Ragavan. I think that the card is like a way to win games on the play, but I think that you should build the rest of your deck in a way that is functional when you're on the draw. And I think that Wild Nacatl is just a better card at doing that, and is totally fine against an opposing Ragavan. Totally fine against a Unholy Heat on turn 1. Kind of like an important lineup there. I don't think Wild Nacatl is as far out of range as it seems, or I guess at least it seemed to be in the past. It's just a lot of power and toughness.
Yeah, I think the way you get here is that you need a certain density of 1-drops in this deck for Scourge of the Skyclaves, which this list by Gyote is a player who is consistently putting up results here. This is right now a 4-color zoo deck. I think last week they had Summon Denial, so going the full 5 colors there. But once you put Scourge of the Skyclaves in your deck, technically you can activate that with Seal of Fire or Lightning Bolt sometimes, but you really want to avoid that if you can. You want to have at least 12, preferably more, good 1-drops so that you are turning that on reliably on turn 2 or turn 3. And once you get past the obvious A-pack of Channeler and Ragavan, the next best thing perhaps is Wild Nacatl, but as you mentioned, there are some contexts where it ends up being maybe the best one drop you could ask for, or at least the least conditional one drop, because Ragavan, as you mentioned, massive play versus draw disparity. Dragon's Rage Channeler, the ceiling on that card is unbelievably high, but going up against Relic of Progenitors, Sanctified Fire on Vex, stuff which is incidentally nibbling away at your graveyard, sometimes that isn't the outright aggression that you need it to be in your aggro deck. And so Wilderness Catalog, just as a trusty, reliable 3/3 for 1, it turns out that rate is still very, very good in 2021.
Yep. Just to break down the deck, it's basically, the 12 best 1-drops and the 11 best 2-drops that you can play, with some Tribal Flames, Lightning Bolts, Prismatic Endings in the mix, Seal of Fire to go with Luris. Sideboard is about what you'd expect. There was an Emrakul for Mill in some of those lists. And the one thing I'll mention is that when you have an Emrakul in the sideboard of your Luris deck, make sure that you're also sideboarding in the Luris against Mill, just to increase the raw cost count of your deck. I know this is something that I learned the hard way recently when I drew too many Pure Steel Paladins in a game and got one-shotted by Atasha's Hideous Laughter.
Nice. I want to run down this sideboard quickly because it is making a statement, shall we say. So beyond the obvious one copy of Luris, it's 2 Chalice of the Void, 4 Force of Vigor, 1 Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, 4 Leyline of Sanctity, and then 3 Rest in Peace, which, if you're thinking Rest in Peace in your Channeler Tarmogoyf deck, this is kind of how you justify getting away with that, right? Is if you have enough threats which don't rely on the graveyard, and so you can build that in, even despite the obvious anti-synergy with your own deck, and still have functional aggressive draws a lot of the time, and not just be, turning your own Channeler into Fugitive Wizard.
I am slightly skeptical of what Leyline of Sanctity is doing, but, what... Let me double check if I thought that Tasha's Hideous Laughter was each opponent, and that's the I'm skeptical you're getting enough value out of that card over just some generic card against burn. This deck could probably can it cast 4 Firewalker?
No,
kind of,
absolutely. I mean,
there's two white sources.
You have a Sacred Foundry and a Temple Garden, and are we counting treasures from Ragavan here or no?
Oh, yeah, that is a lot of white sources. Yeah, they absolutely should count.
Okay, there's some fraction of a white source. We'll see how much they actually amount to there. But yeah, I'm assuming this is just a hammer against burn, and this sideboard is all hammers. And I kind of respect that. This player knows what they want to do with these sideboard slots, and they're using them to maximum effectiveness.
Yeah, I agree with the direction they are taking. I have questions about the individual choices, and that's it.
Yeah. Speaking of Mill, let's talk about the winner of this challenge. Vishnia, I want to say, this is a Polish player. I saw, I think, both Canister and Sodek giving them a shout out. This is one of their first real online results, I believe. So this is blue-white Mill. So the white here for a split of Prismatic Ending and Path to Exile in the main deck. And then we have the remaining copies of each of those in the sideboard. So we can go up to 4 of each as and when we want to there. White mana still casts Luris, as it turns out, so we get to keep that aspect of the deck. And then we have to make some concessions to not having Drown of the Lock anymore. So we have Remand instead, which sometimes Remand is, the best blue interaction you could possibly ask for. Other times it's markedly worse as a counterspell than Drown of the Lock, and Remand is a whole lot worse as a removal spell than Drown of the Lock is. So I think that is a big sacrifice, and it's not clear to me that you're gaining as much as you need to in return here, but it's an interesting approach, to say the least.
Yeah, I think some of this stems from wanting to be able to interact with Murktide Regent a little better, and some of it is also that there's no legal obligation to play the other black cards besides Drown. I don't think Crypt Incursion or you could play Surgical anyways, Fatal Pushes, whatever. I don't have a strong opinion either way. But I do know that Murktide Regent is a big problem for this deck.
Yeah, we were at the point where a lot of the Dimir Mill decks just didn't even run Glimpse the Unthinkable anymore, so it's not like your actual milling capacity is being curtailed by this color switch. And Remand actually is pretty good against exactly Murktide Regent. It's pretty rancid against everything else out of the Izzet Murktide decks. Sometimes, given enough time, you can set up the whole remand your own spell in response to a counterspell line. But for the most part, remand, not the card you want against Channeler and Ragavan, but actually does buy you a whole lot of time against exactly Murktide Regent.
Well, I will say that Rune Crab is a pretty good card against Ragavan.
Sure. I had not considered that angle. That's a very fair point. And we see classic Dimir Mill, I think, popping up in some of these other challenge results too. So we're at that phase of the format equilibrium where people are starting to cut that one shuffler effect from their sideboards because, I haven't seen Mill recently. And then, you're always kind of playing with fire there. And I think going into next week, I would expect to see a lot more one copy of Emrakul in the sideboard of a lot of random decks than I did this weekend.
Yeah, I think people might be sick of that. You want to talk about the deck that has put up a couple new finishes over the last 4 challenges, and that's one that kind of fell off for a while and is now back, and that is Golgari Yawgmoth. There was a winner last week. I believe we briefly talked about this list that's starting to splash white. I believe that was the list that won the challenge. Let me just pull this up and double check on that. 1 second. Maybe that was sorry, I have my challenges mixed up. The one from 2 weeks ago re-upped with the top 8 on Sunday. There we go. That's the timeline. Yawgmoth I think it's dependent on how much Murktide is showing up on a given week. It looks like this list that top 4 the challenge today as we're recording it is not splashing white as opposed to the other one that's the Ether Vial white list, correct?
Yeah, and if you were buying into that narrative from a few weeks ago that it seems like Murktide is dropping off a bit, then yeah, maybe the first thing you do as a response is go and sleeve up Yawgmoth again. But other than that, I don't know if there are any other wider metagame trends that would make this a better choice or a worse choice, and I don't construct some, this happened the week before, and that's why Yawgmoth was able to do so well this week. I think it may just be the deck has always been a little bit underplayed relative to its power level, and the people who have stuck with it usually have been putting out consistent results.
Yeah, maybe the other thing that's worth talking about is a drop-off in Tron. I don't really want to play Tron against, or I don't want to play any green creature combo deck against Tron basically ever. So I think that still holds up as an issue, and I guess there was one in this top 8 this week, but we're not in the 3x top 8 like we saw before.
Yeah, it's more back to being just an occasional player in the format, something you grudgingly respect because it's 5% and you feel like you're priced into doing that, as opposed to it's 10% and you absolutely have to, or it's 1% and if you get Gart, then you get Gart, and that's modern tournaments for you.
Yeah. So do you want to let's round out with the most recent results, which is this Sunday's finals, which is a mono red Eldrazi versus a Jeskai Chalice control by Mr. Cafayette. But based on the 9th place list, that so it looks like Mr. Cafayette between the 2 challenges finished in 2nd and 9th.
Not bad.
This is the I believe these last few challenges have been a little blurry. So yes, this was the one before the throwback episode by Bill Sive. This is the 4X Solitude list. And Mr. Cafayette is on the 4X Solitude plan. No Snapcasters, a bunch of Fire Ices. It looks like a kind of a mesh of the WAFO numbers and the Bill Sive numbers, just maxing out on Solitude as the interactive card of choice.
Yeah, WAFO Tapper not too far behind his friend in this challenge, I think, with a more... I don't know if you can say classic when he is the person who invented the deck, and so, he gets to decide what classic is or what stock is, to borrow that line there. But I think that was the defining point for this week, is WAFO Tapper was back on classic blue-white and didn't have that small splash just for Fire Ice.
Yeah, it looks like WAFO also had a couple less Solitudes, which I think is just kind of acting as the last few copies of Prismatic Ending, because you don't want to mix Chalice of the Void and Path to Exile.
Yeah, and I think also because stuff like Teferi, Hero of Dominaria is less reliable these days, and there's no good win condition that you can really count on to just end games by itself, it's nice to have just random stuff that can sometimes tag in and do the job. So you will get into these weird games where you just draw 2 copies of Solitude and hardcast them, and that now is a threat that your opponent has to deal with. And it's not clean. It's a little bit scrappy, but it gets the job done enough of the time, I think.
Yeah. Notably, back to Celestial Colonnade over Hall of the Storm Giants. I've been pretty impressed with Hall, but I don't know which of those lands is better.
I'm inclined to say Celestial Colonnade, I think. I don't know how I would know the answer to that question unless I really put the reps in, but maybe that's part of the job. So maybe I need to get in the trenches over this week and figure that one out. But I'm inclined to think Colonnade is better. But I've seen Hall do very good work in basically every other format I've seen it in. So that amount of mana is kind of a stretch for Modern, but maybe you can get there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, how many times are you activating Celestial for the 4/4 on like 6 mana exactly? It's not super common.
Well,
but anyways,
it did used to be fairly common that you would go, activate Colonnade, attack, and then have exactly white up for Path to Exile, or I guess these days exactly double blue up for Counterspell. And the second one there, I guess, is still a relevant factor. But if you don't have Path to Exile in your deck, then the ability to leverage the vigilance mana is a bit reduced there. So yeah, maybe that makes sense.
Yeah. Let's talk about the surprise champion, Mono Red Eldrazi. And we're drawing some conclusions based on some other tweets about what this deck might look like, because the list is not quite posted. But the list I'm looking at that has been posted with 2 trophies back to back, it has 4 Ragavans and then cards with mana values like 3 or higher and Chalice of the Void.
Yeah, this may be the first gamer to cast Ragavan off Raminap runes, but I admire their moxie. I like what they're going for here.
Wait, we're not just going Cavern of Souls and naming Monkey? Like, the meme play from old Red Eldrazi is just stopped now.
Yeah, I guess these days you don't get Ayabugan for the discount Eldrazi 4 through 8 slots baked into your mana base, so you need to get the mana ramp from somewhere, and, you could use Warping Wail as Lotus Petal, or you could just play the busted card that everyone is cramming into their decks, regardless of how well it fits or not.
How are we still playing Matter Reshaper? I really hope this list post was 0 of that card.
You can cast it on turn 2, Ari, off your Ragavan.
I guess that's true. That's exactly true.
I want to make a brief public service announcement here. You cannot pitch Eldrazi Obligator to Fury. Do not try. If I see it happen, you've had your chance, you've had your warning, you will be escorted from the building. That's all I'm going to say about that. There's no excuses here. It's one strike and you're out, where that's concerned.
Okay, good to know. Eldrazi Obligator does sound pretty good. I was the lineups with that card are pretty great against Murktide Regent, like Rhino tokens. Like, I know one of the big issues with Footfalls these days is getting your token stolen by Archmage's Charm. And if your opponent's like actually getting scrappy with Eldrazi and gets out underneath you, and you're like finding your way into a Cascades Bowl and trying to get back, them stealing the Rhino is a pretty big deal. If you actually survive a hit from a Pure Steel Paladin, hammer, that is a thing that it can take. And yeah, I don't think there's like a ton of like really cool tricks you can pull with it, but I think it's mostly just like hit your opponent with Murktide Regent and call it a day.
Yeah, I know that the Eldrazi player beat Yawgmoth en route to the final, so don't know if there were some fun Obligator shenanigans involved in there. I would guess Murktide Regent is the big hit in terms of what you want to be stealing to deal the final blow with Obligator, but outside of that, it's a little unfortunate that Primeval Titan just doesn't exist in Modern these days for the sake of Obligator, and there's not really much big stuff that doesn't, you can steal their Channeler, but your deck is not optimized to get Delirium, so it's not like you can leverage the undercosted stats on that card to your own advantage, really. You just have to, swing for your extra 1 and take that. So I don't know if Obligator is really at its best right now compared to where it has been in the past. I know Pro Tour War of the Spark, Mark Jacobson was playing a Mono Red Eldrazi deck, which I think was pretty similar to this one, maybe a little more all in, just given the demands of the format at the time. So this show has popped up from time to time, not really gained too much traction, but a fun one to watch just like a tournament every now and then.
Yeah, I think that the big gap has been you used to have a different monkey. and now you lost that monkey, but now you have a new monkey and you can try again. Simian Spirit Guide. This was the most honest Simian Spirit Guide deck on the block.
Yeah, it's a shame that we have never got to see Ragavan and Simian Spirit Guide working in tandem. Maybe there's some kind of vaguely meme-ish legacy deck that someone can come up with in that space, but yeah, you only get to pick one monkey, so choose wisely.
Yeah, well, in Legacy, you could pick all three and play Gorilla Shaman too. So
you sure could. Anyway, moving swiftly on, I think that just about does it for this week's challenges, the previous week's challenges, and then like 46% of the week before challenges as well. Do we have anything else to get to for that segment there?
No, I think those are all the relevant results from this week and last week. It's been, people are kind of settling in, trying some new stuff that's like within the same ballpark of like Ragavan decks, Cascade decks. We didn't mention Living End, but Living End is still really good. Don't discount Living End. It's great. Yeah, maybe we'll talk about that in the future, but I'm ready to talk about some new cards.
I think at this point, if you mention Living End, it'll be because it somehow didn't make an appearance in a top 8 or a top 16, as opposed to just, booking its trademark 2 to 3 appearances in every single top 8 at this point.
I have to issue a quick redaction. One of those cards is an ape and not a monkey. My bad.
I'm not going to get into the flavor taxonomy of that one. We will send this to an ad break and then be back with some little less monkey business for some Innistrad Midnight Hunt previews. Don't go anywhere.
If you are looking to sell your Magic the Gathering cards, it's never been easier than heading over to starcitygames.com/sell. With a 30% store credit bonus and a fast turnaround time, there's no reason to sell to anyone else. Enjoy 4 convenient ways to sell your cards. Check out our buy list for specific cards, ship your cards on over with the ship and sell program. You can come on into the Star City Games Comics and Game Store in Roanoke, Virginia. And if you have over 500,000 cards or own a store and want to move some of your bulk out, we can come to you. Go to starcitygames.com/sell, that's SELL, to get the details on the best way to sell your Magic the Gathering cards.
All right, let's delve into the previews here for the new set. We have the full spoiler, and luckily, Ari, we're going to get another full spoiler for another Innistrad set in less than 60 days, I believe. So no time to waste. Let's make it snappy.
Okay. I am all in for some double Innistrad. Do they just print the other set on the back of these cards and you're not allowed to turn them over until that set releases?
I would love that. That would be very on brand. But let's start here with, I guess, a big picture view of the set and its mechanics, just what it's trying to accomplish. We have been doing this for 3 preview seasons now. So we started just around Strixhaven, where I think we both agreed that the set had more going on than maybe it was given credit for, but even given that, we had to scrape around to find a full list of playables there, and when we did those top 5 predictions and then revisited those top 5s with our colleagues over at Star City Games, all of the Strixhaven lists, in retrospect, were, number 1, Expressive Iteration, number 2, Prismari Command, and that was just literally every single format. Whereas I think for this set, there's a ton of good cards. I expect this to be a very solid foundation for Standard in just over a week's time. And as the formats get larger, I think different things will be relevant in each of those. So I imagine my top 5 list that I eventually settle on for Modern will look very different from the top 5 list that I have already submitted for Standard. And I think that's ultimately a good thing.
I'd have to double check my Standard list, but my Pioneer, Historic, and Modern lists all started with the same 2 cards.
Oh, wow.
I think,
okay.
Or maybe a slight switch on one of the cards, but I think that there are 2 cards that really stand out in terms of these older formats, and we'll get to those. This is not it is like a very classic Innistrad set. I don't like whatever you saw and would expect from the other Innistrads. It could have arbitrarily been from like this Innistrad set, which is not a bad thing. Like, Innistrad's a cool set. They could keep printing like 5 more Innistrad sets, like they're literally doing starting next week or whatever it is. And it would still come out good. But yeah, I don't know if there's like a huge out of expectation. They're not printing stuff that's like completely changing what's going on. Like, Strixhaven was like weird and out there. This set is pretty much like by the book, Innistrad flashback and graveyard stuff.
Yeah, it seems like that 2019 to 2020 period where every set was shaking every format to its foundations has officially moved past us now. And this is a return to form, I suppose. And I think this is a good model for what sets can look like going forward. And in terms of anchoring our own expectations, of course, the set in the middle there between Strixhaven, I guess there were two sets. I just completely forgot about AFR, which maybe is a statement on that set in and of itself. But the other set, which I had in mind initially, was, of course, MH2, which coming off of that, I think it's very easy for that to overshadow any set. And when we're looking at all of these new goodies in this set, the first thing we're going to be asking is, how do these line up against some of the premier cards from MH2? And so with that in mind, it would be very easy, I think, for any new set, however pushed, to kind of look like a miss given that. But I think this one is roughly where it should be. And if you think back to, 2017, 2018, where the sets which were generally well received maybe had a small handful of playables from Modern, I think we are returning to that territory and settling back in there.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, how many cards from Shadows of Innistrad made a Modern hit that weren't named Prized Amalgam?
People put Tireless Tracker in a lot of Modern decks, and they really shouldn't have, if that counts.
I mean, that could sure count.
I guess Raven Inspector, some people were fighting the good fight there from time to time, but yeah, I think Shadows might actually be the perfect illustration of that, right? Where solid set, didn't really hear any complaints about it at the time, made a massive impact on Standard, but for Modern, there were one or two interesting cards, and then we just kind of moved on with our lives.
Yeah, I mean, Thing in the Ice is, bygone era. I expect probably a little more from this set to hit, but not like, an order of magnitude more.
All right, then. Well, with that in mind, let's start with, I think, the safest bet from the entire set, and as a result, maybe the most boring card on this list, and that's Consider. So this is just opt instead of scrying, you surveil the card instead. So the card goes to your graveyard instead of the bottom. And I think in other formats, this is a legitimate game changer. So in Pioneer, for example, you now have for opt and for Consider fueling Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time, which I think officially are on borrowed time now. I don't know how they made it this long, but their time may be running out there. And then in Historic, and I guess also in Pioneer as well, it makes it that much easier to just chain 3 spells together for your Arclight Phoenix turns without needing to, line up your Pillar of Flame or your Lightning Axe or whatever in a very specific way. Whereas in Modern, you already had Serum Visions, Thought Scour, Sleight of Hand, more options than you could possibly play in a deck. Most of the decks which go heavy on those cantrip effects don't even have odd anymore, right? You look at the stock list of Is It Murktide? So I don't think this card really adds anything new, and if your deck has opt in it, then you upgrade those to Consider, and that's free, but doesn't really require any thought or sacrifice on your part. But beyond that, I don't really see what this card is changing in the format at all.
I did place this as my number one card as a bit of a spoiler, but I am a little further down on it than I think even this discussion is, because I think that Serum Visions having good types is really important. A lot of the action that these cantrips are getting right now is with Dragon's Rage Channeler, and you can only put so many instants with your Delirium card, and Lightning Bolt and Unholy Heat are just way more important.
We mentioned Delirium as being somewhat trivial to achieve, and I think that's broadly true. It requires less effort than I would like, but the one thing that it does make you think about is in deck construction when it comes to, should my marginal additional cantrip be Consider or Serum Visions, and instant versus sorcery is a good tiebreaker there.
Yeah. I do like Consider in the non-channeler. Like there's the Snapcaster Murktide Regent Is It Control Shells that have been bouncing around. I think Consider's like a slam dunk there. Those are probably the single best deck against the Cascade decks, by the way, if you're looking for that. I don't really know how the Temur Crashcade deck is supposed to beat that deck. Like it can beat up the blue-white deck because the blue-white deck doesn't have creatures and like might just lose to like a Brazen Borrower. But like this deck is like Murktide Regent, and you are gonna die to that card instead.
Yeah, so Consider will show up, don't know exactly where, not gonna move the needle too much for any particular deck. One card which really could create or at least re-energize a whole archetype by itself is Champion of the Parish. And I know a few weeks ago you wrote about Champion of the Parish in every format. This week I'm writing about Champion of the Parish in Modern, so really taking a much deeper dive for one specific format. Having seen the rest of the spoiler now, are there any additional zombies which maybe compare with this to do some good work? Is it going to add enough by itself? What's your view on this card now that we've had a few more weeks to digest its impact?
I'm kind of into the 2-mana Lord just by virtue of it being a 2-mana Lord. I don't think that, like, the question there is whether you want to put any other blue cards in your deck, but it might not be a huge ask to, like, have Goblin Bombardment next to the Lord and, like, have everything work together.
Yeah, so let's bring that Lord into the discussion here. This is a 2/3 for blue-black, and it's just your zombies get +1/+1, or other zombies, excuse me. And usually having a Lord, I mean, to be a tribe that is on the radar, you basically have a Lord, right? So Warriors has Chief of the Edge, and Vampires has, Legion Lieutenant, and every single tribe basically has that 2-mana Lord that pumps all the other ones up. But usually that's not really what they need. That's not the missing piece. So I remember when Ixalan came out and you had all of these new merfolk, and I thought, all right, this is pretty impressive, right? We get the third Lord. You get 12 of these in your deck now. We get this new 1-drop in Commander Speaker. This is finally the aggressive, well-statted 1-drop these decks needed. And it turns out that even though after that point, Merfolk was much better at just plopping a lot of power onto the board and applying pressure, that wasn't really the missing piece. And insofar as Merfolk was ever good, it was because, I guess in latter days, Force Negation in your aggro deck was the appeal, but back in the day, it was because Spreading Seas was Sinkhole, draw a card, none of your stuff can block anymore for 2 mana, and that was the appeal, as opposed to my average Goldfish now is, turn 4.2 as opposed to 4.8.
Yeah, so I guess to swerve this back to the zombies deck, I think that, like, the cards that exist already give it whatever the extra angle it needs is, just by, like, the Gravecrawler Carrion Feeder stuff. So, like, a raw power Lord, I think actually is a fundamentally important change, whereas with Merfolk, it's just, like, more of the same.
Yeah, the issue with the Lords in general is if all your other stuff is dying, what is the Lord really doing for you? And with specifically zombies, firstly, you just have more good 1-drops. So Champion, Gravecrawler, Carrion Feeder, Cryptbreaker, that gets you to 16 already, and maybe then you have an interest in Central Supplier for some reason, or Shambling Ghast, or whatever it is. That's a good core of 1-drops. So you can go 1-drop into the Lord reliably, you go 1-drop into 2 more 1-drops, and then the Lord, which is the nut draw in a lot of contexts. And when some of those 1-drops are Gravecrawler, as you said, or you have like Undead Augur to let you refill when your stuff is dying, it just seems much easier to have stuff lying around for the Lord to pump. And that really is the missing piece, where if you're just making this single file procession of creatures and they're all dying, one of those being a Lord is whatever, right? Whereas if you actually have stuff lying around, then the Lord becomes the big threat that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, on a brief aside tangent with Undead Augur, how much with your zombie writing have you explored Ghoulcaller's Harvest plus Undead Augur, with the decayed creatures just kind of fueling more cards?
Not too much yet. That may need to be a late coda to that piece. I would have more interest in that for, I guess it would have to be exactly historic where that's possible, I think. I'm not seeing that getting over the line in Modern, but do you have a shell in mind for that?
No, I just wanted to throw out that the decay tokens work well with Undead Augur, and that's as far as I had thought about it.
Yeah, that part of that seems to be in the mold of, like, one with nothing works great with madness, which is maybe a little more extreme. But I think having the control over when you just throw away your material for some other gain is the key piece there. And it seems like if you had some additional piece alongside Carrion Feeder. So I know when you wrote your article, you explore like Goblin Bombardment in a much more combo-focused zombies deck. Maybe you can do that without the Undying stuff and just have Bombardment anyway, if there's enough stuff which pays you off for dying. At that point, the third color, if you still are wedded to the Lord, maybe becomes hard to justify. I don't know. One other deck-building choice that I think goes into that is, once you've decided, do you want to be an aggro deck or do you want to be some like Goblin Bombardment deck, some Rally the Ancestors deck? If you just want to be aggro, then it's, how much do you lean on Ether Vial, for example? How much do you lean on Lurrus as opposed to all of the various good zombie 3-drops, whether it's the other Lords or it's Geralt's Messenger or what have you. There are some other dead-winning choices there once you have your, automatic 20 cards penciled in.
Yeah, I struggle to think Lurrus is what you want in this deck, just because, like, if you were going to Lurrus, there's so many more efficient 1 and 2 drops, and, like, I don't think the synergies even add up quite to where you need it to be. So I think maybe the question is, like, sifting through the rest of the options.
It does bring up an interesting, more abstract question with Aether Vial, I think, where if I told you, in the dark, you're playing a creature deck and it has 4 Aether Vials in it, what would you want your curve to look like, just given that piece of information?
Huh. More 2s and 3s.
Yeah, see, it's tough, right? Because if your curve is clustered around a certain point, then you can park the vial there and have it be active more reliably and not have to wait for it to tick up, or you tick it up and then you draw the thing that's like a 1 mana value down and now you can't cheat that in anymore. At the same time, if you just have so many 1-drops that that's all you're doing with your Aether Vial, is it doing that much for you at this point anymore? I guess if you have enough mana sinks given that, so if you're activating Crypt Breaker or you're recurring Gravecrawler by sacrificing it to Carrion Feeder, or you're drawing a bunch of cards with your Undead Augur and you just need to unload all of those somehow, maybe that's enough of a use for it. But otherwise, I can see you having this seemingly good Aether Vial hand where you put one thing in, and then I guess maybe you put another thing in that you probably had enough mana to cast anyway, and then it just doesn't really do anything for you anymore.
Yeah, the card you're describing there is Springleaf Drum, not Aether Vial.
Huh. Yeah, it's an interesting parallel there. And maybe Springleaf Drum is quietly just a very underrated card for like the better part of a decade, and we just didn't realize it until there were very specific synergies and context that encourage you to adopt it now.
Well, we didn't realize it because you got to play with Mox Opal. And basically, every Springleaf Drum deck was a Mox Opal deck, and it was always your other copies of Mox Opal. And we didn't know how good we had it.
That makes sense. So what do you think the verdict is on Champion of the Parish? I think it will add more to an archetype than something like Consider will do, but I don't know where I come down yet, even having written about the card on, do I think this actually has what it takes to be a player in the modern format as it stands right now?
I think Champion itself is a fine card. I don't know if the other cards supporting it are quite there, and I would be pleasantly happy if that deck sticks, but I want to see people try because there's a lot, like we've been riffing on, there's a lot of stuff you can do with it.
Absolutely. So let's move on to a card which I have quite a bit of confidence in this seeing play, I think. This is Sunset Revelry. So I guess the obvious comparison would be Townley Reinforcements, but I think it actually does a lot more than that. So this is 1 and a white, and basically for all of these conditions, you just check if your opponent has more of them. So if they have more cards in hand than you, then you draw a card. If they have more creatures, you make 2 1/1s. And if they have more life, then you make, or you gain 4 life. And so if you think about how this plays in practice, and you think about the times where you would want a Timely Reinforcements, or where you're trying to take some weird convoluted lines to set up that card, so you're like deliberately fetching and shocking yourself in an almost like Death Shadow-esque way to bring yourself down to the point where when they shock themselves, they're going to be still a little bit higher than you, and so you can jump back up again. It feels a lot easier, if only because this costs 2 instead of 3, to set up those lines more often. And I think it's rare that you need every single piece of value from a Timely Reinforcements if that's what you're trying to do. I think the times where that is good, 2 creatures and 4 life for 2 mana is probably better, actually, than 3 creatures and 6 life for 3 mana, given how urgently you need to cast that card a lot of the time. And the fact that you can cycle it effectively against, let's say, a control deck where they might have a bunch of cards in hand, including removal spells they can't fire off against your control deck, and you just need to replace this card that isn't doing anything with one that does. I think all of those factors combined is enough to think this one is going to see play somewhere. Maybe it's just a sideboard card still, but I have high hopes for this one.
Yeah, I think this card is just great. I actually think if I made a top 10 across all formats, like this would be my number 1 card in the set. It's just going to be good in every format. Timely Reinforcements is a lot. I think that the 2 things that are not immediately obvious are like how. So you kind of think the payoff for it is like, oh, I just made a lone missionary, but like spreading out the blockers and like being able to sometimes just like turn the corner with that, like, and the fact that it's a spell and this has such a clean buyout, it's just so easy to get so much out of this card, and it just moving timely reinforcements down the curve when that's already like a great card. Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about Sunset Revelry besides like I expect to see it in the format for like the next 5 years.
Yeah, and especially for smaller formats like Pioneer, for example, Standard in particular, there's a whole generation of players who have never been on the wrong end of a timely reinforcements, and that's about to change. And they are about to learn just how powerful that effect can be. Let's move on to one which requires a little bit more digging into, and that's Faithful Mending. So I want to make sure I have the exact text on this correct here. This is 2 mana, white and blue. You gain 2 life, and then you Careful Study. You draw 2 cards, and then you discard 2 cards, and it has flashback for 1 white blue, so 3 mana total. And so that sets up a fairly natural curve if there's just one thing that you're digging for, right? Of cast this on turn 2, flashback on turn 3, you've gained this nice buffer of 4 life, which hopefully can bridge you to that turn 4. And then by turn 4, you've seen 4 extra cards, you've hopefully found that one piece you're looking for, and maybe you've set up some graveyard synergies along the way or something like that. So I don't have an exact home. Actually, I take that back. I do have a home in mind for this in Modern, but maybe it's not the one you have. So the floor is yours here.
Yeah, I think this is a classic case of like, I mean, it looks like Faithless Looting. People are going to be like, oh, you can put it in Dredge. This is like the second best version of that effect in this set. And that's the better version is Cathartic Pyre, because that card says discard, then draw. And that's better than draw than discard for Dredge. And once you're starting to do that, you may as well just have some Oxybugonus in your deck and not have a 5-color mana base and not like need to have your colors early to make this work. You can just have like arbitrary red sources and like cast your Cathartic Pyre. I think that card is going to move the needle a lot more in Modern. As for Faithful Mending, I also think that the fact that it costs 2 instead of 1 with looting, even though it has like all the looting text, that's a really big deal for all the fair decks that are trying to apply it. I don't think you're going to see something on the level of like the Pyromancer deck trying to do this. If you played Is It Phoenix during that deck's heyday, you'll remember that it started with maybe a 2-drop cantrip in it, and then they all immediately got cut because they were just absolutely horrible. This card is so much worse than it looks.
Yeah, I think Ross Merriam had Is It Charm in his deck for 1 week and then never again, and people very quickly just slimmed the deck down, made it hyper lean, hyper efficient. And yeah, a lot of those contexts where you really want a Careful Study or a Faithless Looting, you really want it at exactly 1 mana. And paying 2 is so much more than paying 1, even more so than that difference tends to be anyway. I think those decks feel it even more acutely. The place I had in mind for this was Aspiring Spike was messing around recently with this like Esper reanimated deck where he had the persist unmarked grave stuff going on with Arcana Cruelty in a more controlling shell with like Teferi Time Raveler, Prismatic Ending, Archmage's Charm, stuff like that. And this seems like the ideal place for that kind of effect where you want to play a interactive or reactive game, but then you're working towards some combo-esque finish that maybe involves a graveyard in some way. And I could see this card slotting very nicely into that kind of deck.
That makes sense. I'll make the counter argument that you said the words that this is like, is it charm? And my brain immediately just threw it in the garbage.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a third of an is it charm, but then for that third, it's like 2.5 times that amount. So maybe the equation works out there somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of playing a more interactive reanimator deck, and this card does give you a bit of an angle to do that. A lot of those decks were previously relying on like Jace Vryn's Prodigy that can die to removal, which is not a good idea. This is also an instant, which like with Goryo's Vengeance being an instant and stuff can set up some interesting things going on there. But yeah,
it could go in that very old school Esper Goryo's deck that had like Obstat and stuff and fair targets almost for your Goryo's Vengeance. But if you do want to aim higher and you want to be bringing Grizzlebrand back with this, for example, then the fact that this gains you 2 life with each casting is, when you can directly convert that into 2+ cards, then there's something to be said for that as well. So I think a niche role player here, and I think this card goes in many fewer decks than most people will try to put it in. But in the decks where it's good, then it does do some good work there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, like Azorius are good colors for pitch spells. Just to point out, like Solitude and Force of Negation are pretty good options there.
Yeah, it is a little rough when inherently a careful study effect, at least when you're casting the front side, already puts you down a card. To then be pitching a card again is a little rough there. But I suppose if you are flooded on those pitch effects, right? If you've drawn several copies of Solitude, let's say, or I imagine this would want to be some Teferi Time Raveler deck, and sometimes you have one of those in play and you've drawn a second copy that you don't have time to deploy, and you can kind of cycle through that. So I don't know, maybe there's an argument there.
Yeah, I don't expect my Faithless Mending decks to be playing a lot of game, so I don't really care so much about card quantity. I just care about getting the effects I need in the short time frame that I'm going to be participating.
That makes sense. Let's move on to another flashback card draw spell. This is Memory Deluge. So this is 2 blue, and then flashback 5 blue. You look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana you spent. You pick 2 of them, put them into your hand, and the rest go on the bottom of your deck. So effectively, this is 4 mana, look at 4, pick 2, and then the flashback is 7 mana, look at 7, pick 2. And so I think the most natural comparison here would be something like Factual Fiction, which is a minor role player in Modern at this point. And so I guess we could get Mr. Kafuriet up on the phone and debate the merits of that versus Factual Fiction in this blue-white or Jeskai control shell. But do you have any other uses for this card in mind, maybe?
I know that there was some talk about it with Wilderness Reclamation, which is another historical spot for Factor Fiction. You could, no one's going to fault you for trying that. There's not a lot of great ways to interact with a Wilderness Reclamation in the format. But on the flip side, like, that's because people don't really care about 4 mana sorcery speed enchantments that don't inherently win the game.
Yeah, so we have mentioned from time to time looking for that almost combo control style deck that doesn't have to contest the battlefield very much. So Wilderness Reclamation does fit into that space. The issue has been historically, what is the payoff meant to be? So you can pair it with Expansion Explosion still. You can find some like big X spell that you can just pop off with it. But the issue there, of course, is when you don't have Reclamation, these cards just aren't competitive for their price in the Modern format. And this one is. And this one, you have the natural curve of, let's say you grow Spiral on 2, turn 3, you play Reclamation, you untap, you then get to play this. And then the following turn, you can really sink all of that mana into the flashback, finding the cheap spells that you need. And previous lists, I know when Autumn was playing this deck a lot and writing about it, this was back in the Uro days where Factual Fiction, both finding and fueling Uro was a big deal there. Without that in the mix, I think maybe this edges it out in that context and might be enough to push a deck into being worth some serious consideration still. That being said, you still have the issue of how do you actually end the game, because this is finding you the right pieces, but it's unclear what the second piece there to pair with your Reclamation is meant to be. I'm not a fan of Shark Typhoon in Modern. I don't know what the other options are really, but this is one piece of the puzzle. And if you can find the other one, then you certainly have my attention.
Well, I'll make one point against this card. The traditional endgame has been a Nexus of Fate, and Factor Fiction is really important there, because actually removing the cards from your library is really, really key.
Yeah, I do think Nexus was a lot better here when you had Uro as well.
Yes.
So without that, then maybe you move away from Nexus altogether, because if you aren't gaining some kind of continuous advantage turn after turn, whether it's Surtress Canter, right, in Standard, or Uro in Modern, and so on, then what is Nexus really doing for you? And then if you draw Nexus outside of a Reclamation hand, then it's 7 mana clunking up your draw. So I'm fine making that sacrifice. I will gladly lose Nexus there, but I don't know what I meant to pick up instead. And so someone please answer that for me, because then I'm all in here.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds fun. I remain a little skeptical of the archetype against the hyper-efficient format, but I don't know if Memory Deluge moves the needle that much more so than just like giving people a reason to take another look at the deck.
You also do have that familiar problem of every deck in the blue and white colors has to Fairy Time Raveler, because that's part of why you're in those colors to begin with right now. So that might be an issue, but it's fine. We'll find a way past that. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I think that covers the like pretty surefire stuff. Want to kick it to a break and get a little wild with some of the rest of the set?
Let's do it.
The SCG Tour Online is back. Starting Friday, July 23rd, you can play the best events in competitive Magic for thousands of dollars in cash prizes, piles of MTG Arena gems, MTG Arena qualifier invitations to skip that mythic grind, and at the very top, invitations to the MTG Arena Championships and the StarCityGames.com Invitational returning to Roanoke, Virginia from October 29th to October 31st. You heard that right. The SCG Invitational is also back. And you know the best place to qualify for it? That's right, the SCG Tour Online. Check out StarCityGames.com/SCG Tour Online to register for events, see upcoming event schedules, and get all the details on how you can earn prizes and invitations playing the SCG Tour Online.
Okay, so we're back here to dive into some of the more speculative options here from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. And you compiled this long list of potential role players here, Ari. So I'll let you kick it off with a card of your choice.
Okay, let's just start at the top here. What about Smoldering Egg? How do you feel about some Smoldering Eggs?
We should tell the listeners at home exactly what a Smoldering Egg is and or does, because, don't think they're going to have that one shot in their faces naturally.
Okay, this is 1 and a red for an 0/4. Whenever you play an instant or sorcery spell, put a number of counters on the egg equal to that card's mana cost. Or is it the mana spent to cast it? I forget which one it is.
It is the mana spent to cast it. There's no...
Gotcha.
There's no, like, cheating this with... I didn't even know what it would be in Modern, but there's no, like, Legacy, you play this, and then, oh, look, I cast Forcible, and now my thing is just... you can't do that. I think this is a very intentional constraint.
Well, at 7 mana, it transforms into a 4/4 dragon that shocks something whenever you play an instant or sorcery. Obviously flying. The question I still need answered is, like, does Delving count as paying mana here? I would guess no, but, like, it's weird enough with Trinisphere that I don't know.
I'm going to say if Delving counted, then Hogak would literally not have been castable, which would have been for the better, honestly. Maybe this should have been the rule the whole time. But, I'm pretty sure you have to do this the hard way. So that does also work against what you want to do once you flip this card, because ideally you would love to just start chaining together free spells in some capacity, and you can still do that if it's Manamorphose, for example, right? But that goal of, let's say, I flip my egg into a dragon, and now I cast Finale of Promise, and I'm, bolting everything inside. That doesn't really work in the way you want it to. So, in terms of how to set this card up, there's the obvious curve of you cast this on 2, and then you cast a 3-drop, and then you cast a 4-drop. Are you able to amortize that cost in a more efficient way, or are you priced into trying to do that if you're playing with this card?
I think Manamorphose has to be a big part of it, right? That's just cheating out 2 counters on this. I do wonder if, like, I think it has to be something in the more expensive instants and sorceries realm, because at the point that you're like, I'm going to Manamorphose and play a bunch of cheap stuff, you could just Thing in the Ice, and I have to imagine the backside of that is better than the dragon here.
Yeah, probably. I racked my brain trying to think, is there a way you play this in kind of how the Blue Moon decks used to play Thing of the Ice as like this transformative threat where you just park this and play, maybe you cast an Archmage's Charm, and now it's down to 4 counters left, and it only takes using all your mana on 1 turn to suddenly you have this threat which you're poised to defend now with your Force Negation or something like that. Or if you're playing this card, does it have to be with the intention of flipping it as soon as humanly possible?
That might make sense, but again, Thing in the Ice, I think, is better there. I think the question is, would you want to do that in a non-blue deck?
I guess what non-blue deck is the question, or is this a compelling enough incentive to build something from the ground up with that in mind?
I'm not sure, because I think that the expensive instants and sorceries that you already want to play in this format are, I mean, like you said, Archmage's Charm Cryptic command. But I think it's worth bouncing around. I mean, this is the whole argument we've had over the last year. There's been a lot of like color shifted versions of exciting cards, and this kind of falls into a similar boat. And it's just worth noting that you are no longer obligated to play blue cards and have a Thing in the Eye style effect.
In a similar vein, potentially, let's talk about Moonveil Regent quickly. So this is 3 in a red for a 4/4 dragon with flying. Whenever you cast a spell, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw a card for each of that spell's colors. And when Moonveil Regent dies, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of colors among permanents you control, which I assume that checks for remaining permanents, so it doesn't count the red pip on the dragon itself.
Yeah, it checks on resolution, so they would also be able to like kill other stuff in response.
Okay. I think that's not why we're here. That's not why we're talking about this card. So, in theory, if you have this in play, you have this self-contained card draw, card filtering engine, and I'm already getting visions in my head of like, I cast a Manamorphose, I draw 2 cards, and then the Manamorphose draws me a card, and you have this almost Song of Creation style effect on a creature, which maybe makes it more easily accessible. That being said, the fact that it checks 4 colors means there is a flaw on how efficient this can be. So there's no, like, with Song of Creation, right? You cast Mishra's Bauble, you draw 2 cards. You cast a Mox Amber, you draw 2 cards. And you're just drawing your entire deck at once. There's none of that going on here, really. I guess you could chain Striker Rich, Manamorpho, stuff like that, but I'm not seeing how you keep this chain going and then where you're meant to be going towards with it.
Yeah, I am more excited about this card in lower power formats where it acts as an experimental frenzy and a giant flyer at the same time. But I don't think I had it on my radar for Modern. Looking at the spoiler, another card that's kind of in a similar ballpark is Leer, Disciple of the Drown. This is 3 blue, 3/4 flash, or 3/4 creature. Spells can't be countered, and each instant and sorcery in your graveyard has flashback. It's kind of like in the right ballpark of something you might want to be doing in Modern, where you're like just recasting all your rituals from your graveyard. My only problem is that like it versus Past in Flames, Leer has this issue where like it's not getting cost reduced with the Past in Flames. Like you want a Goblin Electromancer your rituals, and then it costs less to Past in Flames, and Leer doesn't quite have that. But I think there might be equity in it being like a creature that sits on the battlefield. It's like blue that you can kind of do stuff with. Not entirely sure, but kind of in the same ballpark of like, there's a chance this is a weird, expensive combo card.
Yeah, maybe the cost reduction there is you reanimate this somehow. I guess it would have to be Goryo's Vengeance. You can't push this one back, and at that point, maybe you can aim higher still than this even. Yeah, it's a powerful effect, clearly, but I think the setup is just too much for this one to make a mark. Another card that you had on the list here was Death Bonnet Sprout. So this is I'm sure someone will come up with like a mushroom-themed Wild Nacatl pun name for this, but in the meantime, do you want to read at least one and preferably both sides of this card?
Yeah, so it is a green 1/1, and it's got text. That text is, at the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card. Then if there are 3 or more creatures in your graveyard, transform it into a 3/3, which has, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile a card from a graveyard. If a creature was exiled this way, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Obviously the other comparison would be like Delver Secrets, right?
Yes. I guess if you have a bunch of street rates or something, you could flip this and attack with it on turn 2, but the nut draw here is staggered or delayed by a turn, where you play this on 1 and then it mills you a card on 2, and then you do some more setup on 2, and then turn 3 is where you really start going off with it. But it seems hard to actually accelerate that process.
Yeah, I am sort of skeptical of this card, but I expect to play against opponents trying to make it work. I probably say this like every week, but I'm just generally skeptical of like efficient threats that make my deck reliant on the graveyard in Modern. I just think that that's a way to like make your random mid-range deck into something that can lose to a Rest in Peace or Soul Guide Lantern or something.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what scenario I would actively want Hulk, the Death Bonnet Hulk going in. I mean, aside from it being like a thing that transforms and grows, in Modern, my Graveyard Hate, I don't want to wait for my next upkeep.
Yeah, if I have enough graveyard synergies to at least make this kind of possibility, then my deck is so reliant on the graveyard that I need some kind of immediate return on whatever that is. I don't want to be waiting a turn with a fragile engine piece to mill a card and then maybe it gets slightly bigger, but not enough bigger. And in that vein, I'm guessing you'll also be skeptical of Willow Geist. So this is a green for a 1/1 with trample. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Willow Geist. And when Willow Geist dies, you gain life equal to its power. So we mentioned with Murktide Region how that added rider of when an instant or sorcery leaves your graveyard, you still get to pump it up as well. That ends up being surprisingly relevant sometimes, but it feels like with Willow Geist, that is all you're doing. Like, that is the gimmick. And so there's no kind of incidentally free rolling off your opponent's Relic of Progenitus or your own Scavenging Ooze or something. It's, if you're doing this, that is the point, and I just don't think there is a point to doing that.
Oh, you see, I'm actually less skeptical of this card because I think that it could... I haven't thought about what the list of cards that could go with it is, but in theory, there is some sort of boundless interaction that goes off with it. I mean, we saw some of this in Strixhaven with Fuming Effigy, and it's actually really funny to see this Willow Geist next to Stonebinder's Familiar. They just put these two cards into adjacent sets, and one of them is in the set where you're supposed to exile things from your graveyard, and they limited that trigger, but not this one. But anyways, enough discussion about that. I could see Willow Geist going off just because it's the cheapest version of this effect.
I've seen a mention of this in some kind of Yawgmoth deck where every time an undying creature comes back, then it's getting pumped up, and then if you find yourself running short on life, then it acts as this weird reverse Essence Warden where after a certain point, it's got big enough that you sacrifice it and then regain all the power or regain all the life back that you've spent on these Yawgmoth activations.
Did they ever consider just attacking with it at that point? But yes, I love that.
I think if you're playing Yawgmoth, it's to take a billion game actions while your opponent sits there and twiddles their thumbs. It's not to actually... I mean, sometimes Strangaroo Geist has to get scrappy, but for the most part, that's not what draws anyone to the deck.
Really? My experience playing the deck was that you always wanted to be scrappy so that your opponent was at 9 life when you comboed them out, and you're like, I needed that first 11, thank you.
See, I think you have more of a knife, that kind of tactical finish where it's well, because I got this attack in 2 turns ago, it means that when I cast my Garrosh Messenger now, they're at exactly N modulo 2, which means when I draw my Yawgmoth as a 8-outer in 2 turns from now, it's, which I sympathize with, certainly, but I don't know if that's a majority viewpoint.
That's fair. Yeah, I'm more excited about Willow Geist in terms of the 1-mana green creatures. I don't have immediate high hopes for it, but it's on the list of things where, if in 3 years something happened, I'd be oh, yeah, that makes sense. As opposed to, if people started playing with the Sprout, I'd be what did I miss?
Yeah, you mentioned Cathartic Pyre a while back. So this is 1 and a red. You either deal 3 to a creature or planeswalker, or you can discard up to 2 cards and then draw that many cards, which I'm guessing what that means in practice is you dredge that many times, but is it good enough to actually see play there, or is it joining the dredge box and probably gathering dust there?
I would assume it's dust in the dredge box, but you might want more. Maybe you want 6 Cathartic Reunions, so you drop a couple of these in there.
It turns out we can already play 8. I mean, how many more do we need?
Well, people decided against that for some mana reason. I don't quite know, but this one is on color. It's kind of sad that the creature you'd want to kill with the damage part most is protection from red, but you win some, you lose some.
Mm-hmm. Anything else that stands out to you that we haven't gotten to yet?
Yeah, I just wanted to shout out a couple of very simple cards. Turn the Earth and Rotten Reunion. This is one of them's green. You shuffle up to 3 cards from graveyards into their owners' libraries, and it's got flashback. And Rotten Reunion is black exile a card in the graveyard, make a decay zombie, and it has flashback 1 in the black. Just like efficient Coffin Purge style effects, or like Memory's Journey style effects that like exist now that might be the most efficient version of that if you were looking for it. I don't know if anyone is, but it's there. I think if we're still in the role player segment, I think that's about it. If we want to jump to like some build arounds, do we want to talk about Puppet Stitcher?
We do, I think. I don't exactly remember the text, so I'll let you fill that one in here.
Okay, so this is kind of a weird one. It is 2 in a blue for I think it's a 2/2 human, but whenever you play an instant or sorcery spell, a 2/3 human wizard, my bad. Whenever you play an instant or sorcery spell, create a 2/2 decay zombie. So these are the ones that can't block and you sacrifice them when they attack. But then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 3 or more creature tokens, you can transform it into an artifact that says creature tokens you control lose all abilities and become 3/3s. So losing all abilities means that your decayed zombies can block, attack multiple times. So it's kind of like a blue monastery mentor almost. And then the like all your tokens are 3/3 sides can weirdly like transform back. So you can kind of like unexpose the mentor-esque part of it and then like flip it back if they sweep away the tokens.
Yeah, this sounds like a lot of work.
I think it's less work than you you just play instants and get creatures. I don't think that like there's a lot of other junk going on with the card, but I think the baseline of like play this, play some spells, have some creatures is pretty static.
Yeah, I guess what I'm seeing here is there's always been an abundance of that type of effect, whether it's, Young Pyromancer. We were briefly excited about Sedgemoor Witch, as I recall, but that one never really went anywhere. That kind of thing is not really in short supply, whereas it is, by design, increasingly hard to find the, Manamorphoses and Gataxian Probes and stuff that make all of that more appealing.
Yeah, maybe the issue is that I was like, oh, this is a blue card. The problem is that you just described a black card, a red card, and a white card. So, like, when are you not going to have access to one of those? Like, why do you need it to be blue? Like, are you going to make a Simic spells deck? Okay, maybe you have a point there.
Yeah. One other one that we saw here was Rite of Harmony. So this is green and white. Whenever a creature or enchantment enters a battlefield under your control this turn, you draw a card, and then it has a flashback for 3 green and white, so 5 total. And if you're just looking to pair this with creatures, then you always could, because you had a Beck and Call, probably one of the top 5 cards to come out of Dragon's Maze. And that one has never really made any waves in the format, but is being color shifted to green and white enough to move the needle there. And is there some weird stuff you can do with enchantments that maybe I'm selling short at the moment?
I think the flashback might be the more important part, where like you can start to go off and then turn like a shorter combo into a massive combo if you can generate white. But the big issue is we don't have a Birchlore Ranger in the format to do that with.
Yeah, and that kind of Heritage Druid Elves combo chain is yet another case where the difference between 1 and 2 mana is astronomical in terms of setting that up and actually going off and being able to get maximum value from your Glimpse of Nature effect. So, yeah, I don't see this one really doing anything. And if it does, maybe because of that, it might be more on the enchantment side. If there's some weird way to like loop enchantments easily that I'm not seeing. I guess if there were, it would have come up in some context during the Enchantress discussions with Sithis and so on. So probably not on that front either, but want to file away just in case. Maybe there's enough of a critical mass of these 0-cost effects now where you have like Hangabout Walker and Walking Ballista and Stonecoil Serpent. And I guess you always had stuff like Endless One, but these are all somewhat individually playable by themselves. And so once you get up to a certain density of those, and maybe you have redundancy now on your Beck and Call, right? With Rite of Harmony. Like maybe there's some combo in that space.
Oh my gosh. I've seen this and I should know and be able to go back and find it. I don't remember what the deck was doing though.
Well, there was a I want to say a standard version with like Forever Young and Midnight Reaper, where you would put all these back on the top of your deck and then cycle through all of them for free once again. And I'm sure that scales reasonably well to Modern. I'm sure you can find better versions of each of those pieces.
That was, in fact, the deck I was thinking of with Forever Young. A weird Throne of Eldraine card to talk about is broken, but certainly a Throne of Eldraine card.
It's like the 27th most broken Throne of Eldraine card, and just waiting for its moment in the sun.
27 is ambitious, which is kind of funny. But yeah, no, that makes a bit of sense. I know, yeah, because we tested that for the Throne of Eldraine Pro Tour.
And then you decided to just play Oko instead?
Well, yeah, obviously, as everyone should have done. 30% of everyone failed, but 70% succeeded.
If that was your last hurrah in competitive Magic, I can see wanting to take a stand and, register literally anything other than Oko for that Pro Tour, which, I don't know, there was, I guess, like, Edgewort Innkeeper and Mount of the Multitudes until I did that Pro Tour, so some people managed to do it.
I mean, you could have fed an extra day to see scenic Richmond, Virginia.
Sure, there was some nice Confederate monuments there, I guess. Anyway, moving swiftly on. I guess we have Red and 7. It seems weird to save the, one of the first cards we saw from the set, this big marquee Planeswalker for last year. It does a lot of stuff, but I don't know if any of that stuff is directly pertinent to what you want to do in Modern. There might be some, there's a lot of text here. I will leave it as an exercise to the reader to go and consume that one for themselves. But I think any fair-ish land deck that wants this, you probably just do Titania stuff instead at that point. And if you're doing unfair stuff with it, I don't know exactly what that looks like. I guess if you have Amulet of Vigor and a bunch of bounce lands, then Ren and 6 itself acts as this weird kind of ritual effect. But again, where are we going from there?
Yeah, my question is where does this go that it's not bounded by Titania or Primeval Titan? It looks like it's in the ballpark of okay. I will note that this card has a weird issue where it has 4 abilities, but I don't know if you can actually activate the ultimate because you might just deck yourself with the mulch trying to get there.
That's kind of hilarious to think about, and maybe that's a good problem to have. If you get to that point, then you can find some way to finagle around that. Maybe it's you're buying a bunch of these permanents back and you've got some endurances in your deck, so but then you're shuffling back in, or okay, never mind.
Yeah, that is some weird stuff going on. I would like to end maybe with one kind of, maybe I'll throw out one free ball. Just kind of Play with Fire technically makes the concept of mono red burn a little more attractive because it's worth 2.5 damage with the scry, but not super exciting. Let's talk about Hostile. And just the concept of is there a land that just lets you cheaply sacrifice a creature in Modern?
The cheapest one is Mirren, I think, where that's 3 mana and tap to sacrifice a creature. So I think this is the cheapest version of that effect. I have been burned so many times where I see some historic deck featuring Phyrexian Tower, and I think the gears start turning in my head where I could build Yawgmoth with Phyrexian Tower, I could build Scales with Phyrexian Tower, and then I realized that card just isn't in Modern, because why would it be? And it is in Historic, and again, why would it be? But I really want that, and they won't let me have it, and I just always get sad about that.
Yeah, I mean, people, to date myself a lot, people have played with high market in decks that I have observed in tournaments. And my understanding of that land was it basically was tap and then tap, sacrifice a creature, no other text. So Hostile is approaching that ballpark.
Yeah, so to adapt a previous saying, I think the difference between 0 mana and 1 mana is a whole of a lot here, and I don't know if the sorcery speed restriction comes into that too. I also don't know exactly what we're trying to sacrifice. We don't have any Academy Rector equivalent here, right? There's no Gamekeeper as far as I'm aware.
I haven't put that part of it together. I'm just this is my flag of this is the cheapest, freest to play sacrifice outlet in the format is what it looks like.
Maybe if if you have some kind of Protean Hulk deck, then some number of these just work their way into your mana base.
Sort of makes sense, except for isn't it like Footsteps of the Goryo the thing that you want to do with Hulk, and that like is the auto kill?
It is, but you have to get to your end step first, and I guess no one plays Pathway Exile anymore, so you can rely on that happening, but Solitude is kind of annoying, so nice to have some inbuilt outs to that at least.
Maybe you can just then from there have Persist as your backup reanimation spell and use like Hostile and another acceptable card to make it work.
Yeah, I think the main appeal of effects like this, like High Market, and so on, is that they're not taking up spell slots. Like, you don't really have to draw them in that sense. You just play Magic, and some amount of the time you just have this sitting there, and you get to go off a little bit more easily.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I think that does it for Innistrad Midnight Hunt. But speaking of terrible Reanimator decks, we have weeks and weeks worth of Nonsense of the Week, or Nonsense of the Month maybe, to catch back up on. So we will take a short break, and we'll join you for that in just a second here. Alright folks, we're taking a brief time out here to talk about Scg Premium, and for the low price of just $7.99 a month, which is less than the cost of one collector booster, by the way, here's what you get. 5% off sealed product, 10% off singles, 15% off supplies, and that's everything from sleeves, deck boxes, to binders, and so much more. If you're making a big order to get ready for Paper Magic again, that month of premium just paid for itself. On top of that, you get more content and better content than anywhere else at the best prices. If you're here now with me and Ari and you like what you hear, you can get our weekly columns, but that's only the start. How about the literal world champion, and for my money, the best player of all time, Paulo Vitor Damagerosa? How about Pro Tour champions and Mythic champions, from Joey Thompson to Autumn Burchett? We have the best standard player of all time, perhaps, in Brad Nelson, and the best limited mind in the game right now in Sam Black, and so much more. And if one piece of advice from any of us helps you win just one more round in a tournament, well, that month of premium just paid for itself many times over. Get the best discounts and the best content over at starcitygames.com/join-premium. Okay, it is time for a bumper edition of Nonsense of the Week. And to carry on that thread that I mentioned before, there have been some interesting riffs on Reanimator going around in the leagues and the challenges recently. So I started off this kick a few weeks ago where I was trying to find some kind of Reanimator deck that could support Urza Saga, and Cookbook is a great discard outlet there. And once you're doing all of that, then it is almost like Asmo becomes a free roll instead of being the main part or the main point of the deck itself. And Grilled Cheese, someone I know from days brewing up very bad Amulet decks together, has really taken this idea to its extreme. So this list from a 5-0 in the leagues just at the end of last month here. This is Rakdos Asmo Reanimator, but instead of persisting Arcanine Cruelty, that's small ball, Ari. We can do a lot better than that. We are casting Goryo's Vengeance on, I guess Asmo is an eligible target if you really need that, but more importantly, on Grizzlebrand and Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. So Goryo's Vengeance for one of those two cards, I think, even going back to the early days of Modern, that has always been one of the most powerful things you can do in the format. But outside of that brief window where like Grizzlebrand popped off at a few tournaments, or there was a Grixis list running around for a bit, the supporting cast just has never been there to back that up. And maybe once you have Urza Saga and Asmo, and this list even has a bunch of fair cards. We've got like Bonecrusher Giant, Seasoned Pyromancer in here. Maybe that's enough to win a fair game enough of the time. And the other issue with this strategy before is a non-zero amount. You would Goryo's Vengeance Emrakul, wipe their board, deal them 15, and not be able to finish the job. But now you have Asmo to do it, you have your other red creatures, and crucially, you have Urza Saga. So you can just make some constructs and finish the job that way. So there's a lot going on here. I like most of it, I think, and I really want to like all of it, because this is exactly the kind of deck that ropes me in.
Okay. No, looking at this list, I am kind of weirded out by the fact that the only thing you can find with Urza Saga is yet another cookbook, but there's no Daredevils in the deck.
Yeah, I think the fact that you already have at least 10 slots given over to the Goryo's Vengeance package. We have a bunch of assorted like Inquisitions. We have one Thoughtseize, one Lightning Bolt. We've got 3 Bonecrusher Giant, 3 Seasoned Pyromancer. That's a lot of not strictly necessary stuff that we could cut into, and just spending one of those slots on another Urza Saga target, for example, might go a long way here. I do like that with Cookbook as a discard outlet, this is one of the issues before, where if your goal is to Goyo's Vengeance Emrakul, you need to bin it and buy it back all in the same motion, because otherwise that shuffle trigger is going on the sack, and then you're not going to have time to bring it back. And when you had Faithless Looting, that was doable most of the time, and especially with Spirit Guide, because you could set up a turn where you just, maybe with 3 mana, or you have a Spirit Guide, you looting, you ditch Emrakul, and then in response you Vengeance. Without looting, that was kind of a non-starter. But with Cookbook, you can just park that in play and wait until your combo turn, at which point it is a free discard outlet at instant speed for your Emrakul. So I like that a lot. And I think the one copy of Wishful Talisman that we see here is part of that puzzle too, where when your combo pieces are cheaper, it makes it easier to go activate Talisman, find the missing piece, ditch the Cookbook, play Goyo's Vengeance all in the same turn for not that much mana. And in the process, they probably are sacrificing the Wishful Talisman that you just gave them, and so you don't have to worry about that being turned against you on the back end there either.
That sort of makes sense. I've become more and more skeptical of Wishclaw Talisman recently, just because I think that the exposure as like an artifact we were just waiting is bigger than I wanted it to be, especially when you're already like playing cookbooks and people might want to shatter your stuff. But like, maybe a 3 mana tutor is okay in this deck.
Yeah, there is another approach you can take, which is by the aptly named Reanimator Fiend, getting 17th place at the challenge last weekend. So how do you improve a deck in Modern, Ari? Well, you take it, and then you add Ragavan, and you add Dragon's Rage Channeler, and you have a much more structurally sound deck now. Surprise, surprise.
See, no, this is some conspiracy stuff. You see, they banned Simian Spirit Guide to get people to get more Ragavans so they could put them in their combo decks. That's clearly all this is.
Hey, if you Goyo's Vengeance with Ragavan, it's like casting it with Dash, right?
I don't think that's quite the same, but sure. I am noticing this version that's kind of more all in doesn't have Lightning Axe or Bone Shards, Splinters. The new
Bone
one
Shards,
for Modern,
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
Bone Shards. I feel like I would want some number of those just as a discard outlet. It feels like the kind of thing that overlaps with all this stuff, but maybe I'm wrong.
When I was trying the heavier black versions with this was with the Persist package, but I don't think that really changes much. Having Bone Shards just as this really flexible, cheap removal spell, which does actually kill Ragavan and Motide Region, right? But also could power up your Asmo, or it just did a lot of different things. And I found the card pretty exceptional there. And I assume most of that is going to carry across here as well. So both of these decks and this broader strategy, very powerful, but also quite unstable and trying to do a lot at once. And I think, being honest about what your key objectives are and how best to accomplish those while having some buyout clause, I think you can get there, but it's going to take a bit more work.
Yeah, I guess we didn't really talk about Dragon's Rage Channeler and just like casting a spell and hoping that you flip a Emrakul so that you can slam the Goryo's Vengeance after.
Yeah, ideally it's Grizzlebrand, right? So you don't have to worry about the timing issues there, but I guess this technically is a self-mill enabler if you want to, turn your eyes and look at it that way.
Yeah. If that ever happens to you, I think you have every right to be a little tilted.
Yes, you have done it. You have done the thing. Speaking of graveyard decks with Urza Saga, we don't have the full results from today's challenge, I believe, but one result we do have, somewhere in roughly 20th place, I think they finished 5-2. Our old friend, Raging Tail Monster, who brought us the Bloodbraid Marauder Crouching Footfalls deck, was playing Dredge with Urza Saga. So the artifacts in question here, we have the 4 Shriekhorns that you would expect, and 4 copies of the Underworld Cookbook, where this is a discard outlet for your dredgers, and crucially also for your price amalgams and your Oxybagonas and your conflict rates and so on. and so forth. And when you have that repeatable free discard outlet, it means that your best dredger is always the one that's getting dredged again. Because one issue that Dredge has run into in the post-Golgari Grave Troll days is sometimes you have a draw where, all right, you get one dredge out of your Synchro Limp, and then your best dredger left over is a Life in the Loam or something, and it feels pretty anemic. This way, if you have drawn an imp at any point where you're dredging 5 and you're dredging 5 again, and so on and so forth, so that's good. And this also means that your Life in the Loam kind of long game engine, you actually have more of an end game to play toward now, in addition to your Complex Ray. And this list, to make space for all this, has to cut back on some of the Bloodgust stuff, but there's still some amount of that. So this is an interesting angle, and it's a fun proof of concept to see just what kinds of decks you can put as a Saga in, but I don't think it addresses the fundamental issues facing the deck. Like, yes, in theory, this can be another plan against Graveyard Hate too, but how well is that actually going to work out in practice when the rest of your hand is, Narcomoeba, Charizard, so on and so forth?
Yeah, I do like that Underworld Cookbook is kind of taking the Putrid Imp role. I know that Putrid Imp is a card that has been relatively stock in Legacy Dredge for basically forever, that has not had an analog in Modern. So Cookbook as that repeatable discard outlet is pretty nice, but I'm skeptical that Urza Saga is actually a good card for Dredge.
There was a pause there in the middle where I was about to take issue, but luckily the whole sentence came together there. Let's move on to another somewhat broken land here, and that's Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, which has not really seen its modern heyday, but Green Devotion has been an archetype that has popped up from time to time, and it's popped up again here with an addition that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, other aspects of this list make zero sense to me, and we'll cover those briefly. So this is a aggressive-leaning mono Green Devotion deck. We've got some Stranglroot Geist and Old Growth Trolls, and we've got Toski Bearer of Secrets in here. Just a lot of stuff which seems a little out of place to me, but the one big pickup where it all comes together is Endurance, where this is just a good card in the format. As you highlighted, a lot of the control decks have a surprising amount of trouble just dealing with an onboard 3/4. It's a card which people are excited to sideboard in against the various Channeler decks and Living End, of course. So that's just a good card in the format. But in this deck with Nykthos, it becomes a build your own Tinderball almost. This is, I think, my favorite use of the incarnations in Modern, because in their normal guise of just killing all your stuff for free or killing your entire graveyard for free, whatever, easy to get sick of that pretty quick. But when it's finding a way to craft a Black Lotus, or later, as we'll see, a 1/0 just out of whole cloth, I will never get tired of that, I think.
Yeah, the real Simian Spirit Guide was here all along. Do we want to talk about the one aspect of this deck that I'm the most skeptical of right now? Because that would involve going to the sideboard.
Okay.
How is there a Blood Moon in this deck without a red source that you can fetch?
I see. You cast Utopia Sprawl and you name red? Or Burning Tree Emissary, Ari, come on.
Okay, that's 8 sources. We could have 15. But anyways.
Yeah, it feels like we could have fit the Stomping Ground in here, not gonna lie.
Maybe we're just too afraid of having another mountain in play when that happens. It doesn't actually cast any of these cards.
You just Genesis Hydra and you just high roll into it. It's fine.
I did not consider that. That's a big brain play.
So yeah, I think we've seen Blood Moon be a decently common sideboard pivot in Green Devotion before, but usually with the Stomping Ground, which I would advise playing if you were to pick up this deck. There is another Endurance Blood Moon deck that luckily does have a full complement of Stomping Grounds and other red-green sources here, because even in a packed month for Nonsense of the Week, several weeks worth of contenders all vying for a spot on the podium, the clear winner, the number one with an absolute bullet for me, is the glorious return of Kraken Reclamator. And if you're thinking, it's not the return because I've never heard of that card before, let me make your day. So this is I think Shadowmoor favorite initially. Am I right there?
Yes. If you listen to the most recent Receivables, plugging that other pod, this card was brought up there. It is It's a throwback to simpler times. Alliances, Balduvian Horde, but just a little more quality.
Yeah, this one is a real delight. So this is 2 red for a 5/4. When Kraken Reclamator enters the battlefield, discard a card at random. If you discard a creature card this way, Kraken Reclamator deals damage equal to that card's power to target player or planeswalker. And so the Draco to this explosion that we're trying to build here is Impervious Greatworm. This is a 7 GGG 16/16 with Convoke and Indestructible. So I don't think anyone has ever cast this card in a sanctioned game of Magic. What they have done, I suppose, a handful of times is discard it to Kraken Reclamator, because this is officially the biggest creature in all of Magic and in all of Modern, narrowly beating out Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, which, maybe you want a copy there in your sideboard from Mill or something anyway, especially after this weekend, and sometimes you draw that and just get to send that one upstairs. But the idea here basically is you either somehow engineer a board state where you have just a Great Worm in your hand, and you cast a Cremator, and you reliably hit them for 16, and usually that's going to be enough to end the game by itself. Or you spin the wheel. You have 3 or 4 cards left, you're sending one of them at random, and maybe it's a 16/16, maybe it's a Strangaroo Geist, which is not attacking for 2, but it's still hitting them for 2 regardless. It did the job it came here to do.
I know you did mention this one with nothing stuff, so let's talk about that.
So this blew my mind. This sent me to another dimension when I saw it. So this deck has 3 copies of Endurance and 2 copies of Fury in the main deck, which you might think standard fare for Gruul midrange, great cards, great additions to those archetypes, and you'd be right. However, in this deck, if what you want is a free way to empty your hand of some of these more puny cards so that your 16/16 is the only thing left over, then it turns out these actually do the job. And so there will be a fair amount of Endurance shuffling 0 cards back in, or Fury with 0 targets. And once that happens, if you've seen this deck before, you know the writing is on the wall. You know exactly what's about to happen to you. And if you haven't seen it before, then you are incredibly confused. And then, the gimmick goes off, and your life will never be the same again.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff in this deck, but that is one of the things I think I can appreciate the most.
Back in the day, what you did, or what I was doing at least, is you would have a Noose Constrictor, and so you could just surgically dismantle your own hand to the point where you only had the cards you wanted left, and then you could just Eldritch Evolution that into the Cremator and then hit them for 16. And that did the job. That was a nice clean kill right there. But this list finding some more creative ways to do that.
That I would certainly describe the one you also listed as creative as well. But, I do like how there's a Veil of Summer in the sideboard here.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to sequence it weirdly because, if you Veil of Summer, you don't want to draw the card because that's another thing you have to get rid of.
Yeah, and God. And I guess also Force of Vigor in the same vein, right? Like if you've got some, usually you would be pitching the 10 casting cost card that you drew and can never cast. But no, not here, not in this deck. You're pitching the Noble Hierarch that really wanted to be cast on the first turn, because now, you get to get down, you get to mulligan. Actually, this deck must make great use of the London Mulligan, right?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, the London Mulligan is, in fact, a combo piece. I appreciate that the Force of Vigors are in the sideboard because, with the Incarnations, you can cast them without a target. You do need to have a target with Force, so you should only bring it in when you have a target for emptying. This is a little...
well, no. What you can do is you can target the main deck Chalice of the Void in this deck, which you can also play for free if you just need to get those out of your hand. And, hey, sometimes... playing that for 0 is exactly what you want to be doing in the matchup anyway. So
you can actually just cast Force without a target because it's up to 2 target artifacts and enchantments. So one with Nothing Dream lives on.
See, it's all coming together. Yeah. Other fun features of this deck, we've got 1 Magus of the Moon, because sometimes why jump through all these hoops when you can just Eldritch Evolution for that one and end the game on turn 2. We have a Obsidian Charmor in the same vein, I think, here. And we've got some toolbox cards in the sideboard here. Some Shifting Ceratops. Not quite sure what that one is for, but I'm keen to find out for myself. And then if Magus of the Moon is a little bit too fragile, well, hey, this can also just be a Blood Moon deck.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Sifting Ceratops is for the color blue, but I could be mistaken.
And hey, once again, if no one's playing Path to Exile anymore, then maybe, this is going to get at least one hit in.
Yeah, it can block a Murktide region.
Can these blue-white decks ever beat a Thron?
I don't believe so. I made the joke that they couldn't beat a Wolfie or Silverheart, so there's absolutely no chance they could defeat Thron.
I guess if you have to tap out for it and they get to Supreme Verdict or whatever, but that's what the Blood Moons are for. We've got it covered on every angle there.
Perfect. All under control.
I do love also that this deck gets to make good use of both Noble Hierarch and Ignoble Hierarch, where, this is a green-red deck. We got some double green cards, some double red cards. Not on the same level as Strangaroo Geist into Geralt's Messenger, but it's Strangaroo Geist into other stuff. And we've got this load-bearing Cavern of Souls, which I'm pretty sure is actually a safety hazard, like that one's not casting your spells consistently. A lot going on here. A lot to unpack, as they say.
You did say good use out of Noble Hierarch, and you're like, I don't think you can curve Noble Hierarch into Flametongue Yearling. I guess that's what the 2 Firelit Thickets are for, so never mind. My brain's just not large enough.
Yeah, you don't want to draw the Thicket with the Cavern of Souls, although I guess if you want to work some Eldrazi into this deck or something, then maybe, that's how we get that one started. But this deck may be doing enough already. I don't want to put any additional burdens on it.
No, I don't. I guess Cavern of Souls is because you can't play more than one Domri Anarch of Bolas in the main deck, but you can play it in the sideboard.
Sure, why not?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, what's weird is that card is as stock as any copy of any card in the Gruul Krakenrick Cremator combo. Try saying that one 5 times fast. Can be, but I've seen this card in this deck before, and I don't know why. Like, is it one person who decided this 2 years ago and just no one has ever changed it, or is this card actually really good and I'm just selling it short here?
Let's see. We can look up the player history and see if this is the same person over and over.
Oh, I really hope their Goldfish is just 3 pages of red, green, just all the way down. And I know exactly what those are going to be without having to click on them. But let's find out here.
Yeah, well, it's not 3 pages.
Doing it live.
There's 3 instances. They have played things that aren't Cremator in Pioneer, because Cremator is not in Pioneer.
Well, that raises the obvious question of, if they have 3 published results with this deck, how many failed leagues were there before racking up those results?
That's a great question. They did play the Glimpse, like the all-in Glimpse deck for a while, so maybe they tried some other stuff and then went back to Old Faithful when nothing else could win.
They may have a certain predilection here, it seems like.
I mean, one of their Pioneer results includes Tetsuko Umezawa's Fugitive and Assault Formation, so...
Of course it does. They play one way, I guess is what we're trying to say here. And with that, I said a while back with the Sorin First Liver deck, I'm not sure how we would top that for Nonsense of the Week. I don't know if this one does officially, but it's at least in the conversation, and you have to respect that.
Yeah. I can appreciate a good old Impervious Great Worming.
Honestly, Triumph-Tron may have stolen the thunder there already.
Yeah, if we discuss the version of that had the Learn Lesson package, I think that's a pretty good first place. But we might have to go back and compile a nonsense of the week.
Yeah, if we ever have some once we get to our 50th episode or whatever the milestone is, or there's some slow news week and there are no results, it's just all nonsense from pillar to post, then maybe a good time to revisit that. But for now, we will let you all get out of here with a healthy dose of nonsense to tide you over. You can find me on Twitter at Dominaria. You can find Ari on Twitter at ARMLX. Not quite sure what the topic will be for next week's episode yet, but we will be back regardless with more nonsense of the week and more results this time next week. Take care, everyone.